My daughter-in-law carried my furniture out of my own living room and thought silence meant surrender. What she didn't understand was simple: the house, the money, and every rule still belonged to me. My daughter-in-law Celeste's perfume smelled like expensive elegance, but her words tasted like vinegar. Evelyn, we just thought these old armchairs took up way too much space in the living room, she said, as two movers carried my furniture out onto the patio. My son Garrett stood nearby, staring at his phone, completely silent. This was my house, built 30 years ago by my late husband and me in a quiet suburb of Grand Rapids. 6 months ago, the two of them had moved in, supposedly to save on rent and help me out after my husband passed. But within a few weeks, I felt Celeste taking over. She swapped out the decor, reorganized the kitchen, and made me feel like an unwanted guest in my own home. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just watched. Celeste gave me a cold smile, mentioning that the new modern style was a better fit for a young family. She assumed I'd just roll over because I was older and lonely. She thought I needed them. Garrett cleared his throat and said, "Mom, it's just temporary until we get the place looking a bit more modern." I felt the chilly wind on the patio and saw my chairs sitting out there. In that moment, I realized talking was useless. Celeste wanted to push me into a single room, step by step, until I left on my own. But she forgot one detail: this house was completely paid off, and every single deed and utility was in my name. I walked into my small home office, sat at the desk, and opened the gray folder of bank documents. It was time to rearrange things. Quietly. Celeste thought she held all the cards, but she didn't even know who paid the bills. The next morning, I was at the kitchen table at exactly 7 o'clock, just like always. Celeste came downstairs in her athleisure wear and looked at me, surprised. "Oh, you're up. I was actually going to make breakfast for Garrett and me. We're going to need more room in the fridge for our organic groceries now," she said in passing. She tossed a generic box of oatmeal in front of me while unpacking expensive smoked salmon for herself and Garrett. I said nothing. I just drank my coffee from the old mug she wanted to throw away. Garrett walked in, half awake. "Morning. Mom, can you grab that FedEx delivery this afternoon? We're running late," he asked without looking up. "No." "Garrett," I replied calmly. "I have an appointment in town today." Celeste froze mid-motion. "But Evelyn, that's the new entryway console. You're usually just here all day anyway." I stood up, rinsed my mug by hand, and placed it exactly where it belonged. "I have plans," I repeated. "After breakfast." I went down to the local credit union. Up until then, I had kept a joint checking account for household expenses, which Celeste and Garrett had been using freely for grocery runs and subscriptions. They treated it like a gift. I sat down with Mr. Vance, my longtime banker, with a few clicks. I revoked their access and froze the card. My money stayed with me. When I got home, I heard Celeste arguing loudly with Garrett in the hallway. Her card had been declined at the grocery store. Garrett looked at me helplessly as I closed my door. The first step was taken. Celeste cornered me right in the hallway, her face flushed. "Evelyn, there was an issue with the house account. The card was declined. We had to pay cash, and it was incredibly embarrassing," she said, her voice sharp. Garrett stood in the background, not daring to catch his wife's eye. "The account has been closed," I said, my voice low and steady. "You live here rent-free. That doesn't mean my retirement fund covers your salmon and streaming services. From now on, everyone handles their own expenses." Celeste scoffed in disbelief. "We're We're a family. We wanted to help you so you wouldn't feel so isolated. I gave a faint smile. I don't feel isolated. Celeste, I enjoy the peace. The next day, I put the new boundaries into practice. I bought a small, locking mini fridge for my home office and stopped touching any groceries in the main kitchen. When Celeste cooked, I sat out on the porch and read a book. She tried to get under my skin by leaving dirty dishes in the sink for days, thinking my need for neatness would force me to clean up after them. Instead, I completely ignored the mess downstairs. I only cleaned my own room and the small upstairs bathroom. By day 3, the kitchen smelled awful. Garrett finally had to do the dishes himself because Celeste refused. He looked exhausted. At dinner, Celeste whispered loud enough for me to hear, "She's starting to lose it. Maybe we should look into an assisted living community for her." She thought she could scare me. She didn't know I was already setting up my next move. Celeste shifted tactics, trying to freeze me out entirely. She invited her friends over for coffee without saying a word to me. When I walked into the kitchen to grab a glass of water, the chatter instantly died. "We were just talking about landscaping the backyard," Celeste said loudly. "We're planning to tear down that old greenhouse. It just takes up space." That greenhouse had been my husband's pride and joy. It was where I grew my heirloom tomatoes. I took a sip of water, looked Celeste dead in the eye, and said, "The greenhouse stays. Anyone who touches it will be off this property by the end of the day." One of her friends choked on her cake. Celeste went white with rage but didn't say another word in front of her guests. That evening, Garrett came to my room, looking weighed down. "Mom, you're making things really hard on Celeste. She's just trying to build a life here. She thinks you're clinging too much to the past. A smaller room or maybe your own little apartment would be so much more manageable for you at this stage." I looked at my son, the boy I had raised, and felt disappointment instead of pity. "Garrett," I said quietly, "this house is mine. If Celeste wants to build a life, she should buy a piece of land and build on it. I'm not holding you back." He swallowed hard. "But we don't qualify for a mortgage right now. You know how high the interest rates are." "Then you should start saving," I replied, opening my book to signal the end of the conversation. He left with his shoulders slumped. They still thought I was just an obstacle to be cleared away. When winter hit, the heating bills skyrocketed. Celeste loved keeping the entire house at 78 degrees, walking around in a t-shirt while leaving the windows cracked for hours. I used to pay the utility bills automatically, but that auto pay was gone. One afternoon, the gas company called about a lack of updated billing information. I cleared up the issue and split the account, setting up a prepaid plan for my specific zone, while the main meter had to be put under the name of the people actually driving up the bill. I brought Garrett the utility transfer forms when he came home from work and laid down a pen. "What's this?" he asked, looking tired. "The utility transfer. I'll pay my share in cash to you directly. You two cover the rest." Celeste stepped in and snatched the paper away. "This is ridiculous. You're just penalizing us." "No," I said evenly. "I'm adapting to your lifestyle. You use the energy, so you pay for it." Celeste refused to let Garrett sign. She assumed I'd back down when things got uncomfortable. 2 weeks later, they sat in a dark, chilly living room because the utility company restricted service to their zone due to the incomplete registration. In my room, it was warm and the lights were on. I had a small space heater running on my own, separate, verified circuit. Celeste was practically boiling with anger, but she had no leverage left. She was finally starting to realize that every action had a direct consequence. Thank you for watching Quiet Revenge. AI tools may assist parts of our workflow, but every story is carefully chosen, edited, reviewed, and produced by our team. If you'd like to help us continue creating meaningful family stories, please consider supporting the channel with the cost of a small coffee. Patreon, https://www.patreon.com/Quiet Revenge Family. Ko-fi, https://ko-fi.com/These Tree Family. PayPal, https://www.paypal.com/paypalm/kanhuangmin. Your support is deeply appreciated. Hoping to smooth things over, Garrett suggested a joint dinner. He made a simple pasta dish, and Celeste sat at the table acting as if nothing had happened. "Evelyn," she began, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "We were thinking it might make the most sense for us to take over the top floor entirely. You'd have your own space downstairs, which would be so much easier on your knees anyway." I chewed slowly and swallowed. "The upstairs holds your father's old study and my master bedroom. I won't be moving." Celeste lost her temper, slamming her hand on the table. "This house is way too big for one older woman. You're holding back our future, Garrett, and I want to have kids. And we need the space. You have to accept that times change." Garrett flinched but stayed quiet. I set my fork down neatly on my plate. "If you need space for children, you should look for a larger apartment. This house has plenty of room for me. It only seems cramped because you're here." Celeste let out a bitter laugh. "You can't just throw us out. We broke our old lease and spent a lot of money painting and updating things around here. You painted walls, I liked the way they were," I replied. "That was your choice. I never asked you to do it." I stood up, took my plate, and left the kitchen. Celeste shouted after me, calling me a selfish old woman. Her words didn't register. I had already set up an appointment with a real estate agent, but not to sell. I had very different plans for those extra rooms. The next Saturday morning, the doorbell rang. Celeste opened it to find a sharp-dressed man holding a leather portfolio. "Good morning. I'm Mr. Vance. I have an appointment with Evelyn Hoffman regarding renting out the upper floor," he said politely. Celeste stared at him, completely blindsided. "Renting. There must be a mistake. We live here." I stepped into the foyer, wearing my best tailored slacks. "No mistake. Mr. Vance, please, come on in." I led the agent straight upstairs, right past a speechless Celeste. Garrett was sitting on the couch, looking utterly bewildered. I showed Mr. Vance the 3 large rooms upstairs, which could easily be accessed independently via the side stairwell. "These rooms are perfect for young professionals or local college students," I explained. "There's a full bath up here. They can share the main kitchen downstairs, or I might install a small kitchenette up here later." The agent took notes and photos. Celeste stood in the doorway, her eyes burning with anger. "You can't do this. This is our space," she hissed. I turned to her calmly. "There is no lease between us. Celeste, you don't pay rent, you don't cover utilities, and you don't respect my boundaries. I need the extra income to offset the rising cost of living. The upper floor will be listed for rent starting next month." The agent felt the tension, but remained professional. "The location is fantastic. Mrs. Hoffman will find great tenants in no time." By the time he left, Celeste was shaking with rage. She finally realized her dream of a rent-free luxury life at my expense was over. Celeste tried one last, desperate move. She hired a locksmith to change the front door locks while I was out getting groceries. When I got back that afternoon, my key wouldn't turn. I stood on the porch and took a deep breath. No panic, no tears. I walked over to my neighbor, Mr. Harrison, a close friend of my late husband. He lent me his toolbox, I walked back, used my spare key for the back patio door, which Celeste had forgotten to lock, and entered the house from behind. Garrett and Celeste were sitting in the living room, probably celebrating what they thought was a victory. I walked right past them without saying a word, heading straight for the front door, using my neighbor's screwdriver and hammer. I cleanly removed the new lock cylinder within 10 minutes and reinstalled my old one. Celeste ran into the hallway when she heard the noise, her eyes widening as she saw the new lock sitting in my hand. "You're damaging our property!" she yelled. I set the lock on the entryway table. "This is my house. Changing the locks without my permission is trespassing. I simply restored my own property." I looked at Garrett, who kept his eyes glued to the floor in shame. "Garrett, if your wife tries to lock me out of my own home again, I will pack your things and put them on the curb. I am entirely serious." In that moment, they both realized I wasn't some frail woman they could push around. I owned the house, and I was fully prepared to enforce it myself. The atmosphere in the house over the next few days was freezing, but completely quiet. Celeste didn't say a single word to me. She spent most of her time on the phone, likely hunting for a new place. I didn't feel smug. I just felt a profound sense of relief. The boundaries were finally clear. One evening, I saw Garrett pulling moving boxes out of the basement. He knocked softly on my door. "Mom," he asked cautiously. "Yes." "Garrett, come in." He sat on the chair by the window. "We found an apartment. It's smaller and costs more, but Celeste doesn't want to stay here anymore." I nodded. "It's the best thing for both of you. Garrett, you need to stand on your own 2 feet." He looked at me, a bit hurt. "Do you even care about us anymore?" I walked over and put a hand on his shoulder. "I love you, son. But loving you doesn't mean letting myself be pushed out of my own home. You didn't respect my space. Now you have to learn to pay for your own." He nodded silently. The following weekend, the moving truck arrived. Celeste got into the car without looking back. She had lost her pride, but hopefully, she gained some perspective. Garrett gave me a quick hug and whispered, "I'm sorry, Mom." I watched them drive down the street. The house was suddenly very quiet, but it was finally my house again, 2 weeks after they left. I sat back down in my living room. My comfortable old armchairs were right back where they belonged. The scent of fresh coffee and a homemade apple pie filled the air. I hadn't actually rented out the upstairs rooms. I pulled the listing the moment Celeste and Garrett moved out. I didn't desperately need the money. The rental listing had just been the leverage I needed to shift the dynamic. Instead, I turned the upstairs space into a large art studio for myself, picking up a painting hobby I had put off for years. Yesterday, Garrett called. He sounded stressed, but noticeably more mature. He mentioned how expensive the city was and that Celeste had taken on a part-time job to help cover their new expenses. He asked if he could come over alone this Sunday for some coffee. "I'd love that, Garrett," I told him, but we leave the past at the door. I looked out the window at my greenhouse, where the first tomato plants of the season were starting to sprout. I was 70 years old. Kind, but unyielding. I hadn't used lawyers or loud shouting matches to protect my home. I had used the quiet, immovable weight of reality. Celeste thought I was vulnerable because I was on my own. Now she knew that the ultimate decisions in this house would always belong to me. I took a sip of my coffee and enjoyed the beautiful, well-earned peace. Thank you for watching Quiet Revenge. AI tools may assist parts of our workflow, but every story is carefully chosen, edited, reviewed, and produced by our team. If you'd like to help us continue creating meaningful family stories, please consider supporting the channel with the cost of a small coffee. Patreon, https://www.patreon.com/quiet revenge family. Ko-fi, https://keo-fi.com/these three family. PayPal, https://www.paypal.com/paypalm/kanhwangmin. Your support is deeply appreciated.